Welcome to another workshop episode, and today we're going to be doing the cladding on the outside of the building.
We're also going to be installing our non-combustible metal box profile on the boundary edges, and then I'm going to finish installing the rubber roof. And by watching this video, you're going to learn how you can make something that looks like this.
First thing we need to do is batten the First thing we need to do is batten the outside of the building with the vertical and horizontal battens. I'm going to show you how to do all of that, and then we're going to move on to the cladding, and then this thing is going to look something. We've got 2x1 battens, and we're going to double batten the building. Now we double batten it because we're going to be having vertical cladding. So what we're going to have is vertical battens first, then horizontals on the top of them. And that will give us a nice gap behind the battens for airflow to run up into the soffit as well. We'll start cracking on and I'll explain a little bit more as we go. So because we're putting battens on every 400, we need to fire our nails through the battens into an upright behind. We can't just fire it into the OSB because it won't hold. So we know that if we mark every 400, we'll hit an actual stud. The other way to do it, if you pull the membrane down, you'll be able to see the nails that we use to hold the OSB onto the studs, and you can just make a little mark. So now we've got our marks on there, we're going to put our vertical battens on first. So starting from the top, line it up with a mark, stick a nail in it, we get our level and nail it all the way down. Now on the corner here, it's very important that we get it dead in line with the corner. We'll put a vertical one right down the edge, and then we're going to fly our horizontals past very slightly and then cut them off with a multi-tool. I know the building's plumb and upright, so I know that I could just use that corner there to get that batten perfect. And I can just work my way down. Right, so that's the verticals. We'll do that all the way around the building and then move on to the horizontals. So what we're doing now is just putting our horizontal battens on. What that does is gives us an air gap for any moisture. Hopefully you won't get any anyway, but any moisture that builds up behind that cladding, and it also gives us a good fixing for our vertical cladding. I'll get this one on and then I'll level it, so I'll pin it at the end, and then from that point there I can just manipulate it with my level, and I can just run along and nail it and trip over as well. Nails. Again, see, it's always when you're filming. Every time. We'll do that all the way from the bottom up to the top so that we've got a good fixing for our cladding all the way up. Our battens are on. You can see we've got the whole thing double battened now. If I take you around the back, let me just show you what we've done around there. We have, if you can see there, we've done the same on the back, but what we've done is spaced these battens out a little bit more. The horizontal battens are the same. You can see the corners there, exactly the same as the front. The vertical battens are at 700, and that's because the back of the building there is just having the non-combustible metal sheets. They're just going to tech screw through into the battens. And there's no weight there at all. It's not like the cladding. It's very, very light stuff, so we don't need to worry too much about the 400 centres on the battens around the back. Before I do any more to the outside, I'm going to get the door in this thing. Getting the door on will stop all the water blowing in here, so that's what I want to do this afternoon, get that door in. So the door I'm using is from TWF Roller Garage Doors. Their link will be down below in the description. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll have seen me use their doors before. I like them because they're a DIY order. They're really easy to fit. I mean, I'm here on my own today. I'm going to fit this garage door on my own. It'll probably take me a couple of hours. They're super easy. Now, if you were doing this build as a garden room, you would have probably carried your bottom plate all the way across to create a door threshold, and you'd have then been able to put a set of bifolds or French doors or whatever you want to put in there, and it would have been a garden room really instead of a workshop. So because I've done a roller door video on the channel, if you want to see more about how to fit a roller door, click on this link here, because that shows you the process kind of step by step. I'm going to breeze over this today. I'll still show you a little bit how to do it, but it's not going to be so much of a guide. So first thing I'm going to do is cut my guide rails down. These guide rails, what they do is they sit just behind your door, because this is a behind fit door, and then the curtain runs down in the guide rails. Above the guide rails sits, if I show you, it's upside down, but above the guide rails sits the top box. That's what the curtain's held within. And that top box sits on top of the guide rails on these little lugs here. So essentially what I've done is cut down the guide rails to length, allowed the space for the top box for it to sit on top of the guide rails. You can see that now sits just directly under the joists here. Like I say, if you want more precise info, check out the other video, but that's essentially what you got to do, sit the top box on the top of the guide rails. Now before we go any further, I'll just check the level of the top box. Absolutely bang on. So now we can fix the guide rails in place before we fix the top box. It's really easy because it's a timber frame building. All we're going to do is screw it all the way through the hole into the timber behind. So our top box is supported by the guide rails, but I just want to put a little fixing through the casing in the top of the top box here, just to bear some of the weight, so all the weight is not on the guide rails. This is quite a small door, so I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference. It's just a bit belts and braces really. So I'll lift the curtain up into position. It's actually harder to explain how to do this than it is to do it. I've put the lock and springs onto the rings. They slide on to hold the lock and springs in place. And then with a little key fob here, I've just pressed up, and that way the curtain's rolled itself onto the motor bar. And now we'll be able to get the door into the guide rails and set the limits. The door comes with this little tool here. It's a little hex tool, and that helps you to adjust the limits. So what you do is you just slide that little tool into the hex key there, and you can adjust the top and bottom limits by turning that key. And we'll stop with roughly one slat of the curtain showing underneath the top box. So the top limit's set. I can now lift the bottom slat into the guide rails. Just be careful not to scratch it as you do this. And there we go, that is perfect. That's the curtain installed. So we're now going to set the bottom limit. I'll close the door down first to see where it stops. Working in darkness, hopefully you can see me. Okay, so you can see that the door stops short. I'll hold the down button on the remote and turn the hex key until all the slats concertina down together and the door's fully closed. Top and bottom limits are set. Let's give the door a test. All the slats should concertina together fully, just like that. So the door's installed. I've just got to put the cover on the top box now and put a couple of little caps in the screw holes behind, and that is a workshop door fully installed. Cladding, the stuff that hides all of my hard work so far on the workshop build. And we're going to be installing this Ecoscape Forma composite cladding. It's the silver birch colour, which I think is going to look really nice with the black door and the rubber roof and everything else. I think the effect's going to look really good. And we're going to install the metal box profiles on the back of the building as well. So the lads have sort of made a start in the background. They're doing a bit of setting out for the cladding. I'll give you a bit of a walk around first so that you understand what we're doing. Do you know, whenever you're talking to camera, these lot start up a saw. So look, what we're doing, so the front of the building is going to be clad in the composite cladding. It's the Ecoscape Silver Birch, the Forma range, really great stuff. I'll tell you a bit more about that shortly. This side is also visible from the house, so that's going to be composite cladding as well. And if we walk around to the back, what we're going to do on the back, we're going to clad this with metal box profile sheets. And there's a couple of reasons we use the metal box profile sheets on the back and the other side that's not visible. Reason one, it's cheaper by quite a long way. Probably the more important reason we use the metal box profile on the back is because it's a non-combustible material, and you need that non-combustible because we're within a metre from the boundary. So to stay within permitted development, we have to make it non-combustible on the edges where the boundary are. So once we've got that nice composite cladding on the front of the building, we're going to go round and do the metal sheets on the sides. Normally I would have done the roof first, so got the fascias on first, got the epdm glued down, but we haven't been able to because we use this perma-roof glue to glue the roof, and you can't use that stuff if the temperature drops below freezing for 48 hours. So we've been held up on the roof. So we're going to do the cladding first, do the soffits, clad them as well in the composite cladding, and then we're going to do the roof last. So it's a little bit more back to front than how I wanted to do it, but these things happen. We can't control the weather. As you've seen on previous episodes, this is actually quite good for our standards of working outside, isn't it?
It is. Anything above 2
And yeah, anything above -2 is good for us. So Luke is setting an external corner for our reveals so that we can clad the reveal up to the door. Now there's a couple of ways you could do this. You could use Ecoscape's reveal trims, and let me show you this side. So I don't want to stop him working. So normally what you do is your reveal trim would come up to the door and your cladding would slot into it, and that would hide your reveal and look really neat. But just because of how it's worked out, unfortunately in this case, our reveal trim doesn't cover because we're having our cladding vertically and we're double battened. Unfortunately, that was a bit of an oversight. It's one of them things, in hindsight, I'd have probably had an inside fit door because I could have brought the guide rails of the door further forward to cover them with the reveal trims. But there you go, one of them little learnings when you've never used a product before, you'd never know. I've got a board in there already, look, you can see how nice it looks. The plan was, when we built the building, to use cedar. So Western red cedar, we were going to have that vertically installed with secret nails, so you just pin it to the battens. So there's already a few differences because we've changed the plan and they've gone with a composite cladding. We've never used this product before, so we're learning all the time as we go along, and you guys are going to learn with us. So to start with, rather than using a starter bar on the bottom, we've got an F-trim, but you don't have to use them. You can actually just cut a straight edge on the cladding board, but I think having a trim just gives it a nicer edge. We've installed the corner trim as well, so we need to make sure that the corner is plumb from the beginning, because if we get these trims out at all, when we put the cladding boards in and work our way along the wall, they'll all start to creep over.
The F-trims and corner trims are really easy to install. You've just got a pilot hole and countersink all the way through into the batten, and then use a wood screw to fix them in place.
So the first board's in. I'll show you how we fix them in a minute, but the first thing we need to do is cut the length of the board. So the best way to do this is take a measurement between the two trims and then make the board 12 millimeters longer than that measurement. So the board's been cut and it should now fit between the two trims. Now, if we place the bottom of the board in first and then the top, it should just fit, which it does.
You can then slide the board up into the top trim by 6 millimeters.
So now we've got the expansion gap we need, we can fix that board in place. So we've got the little Ecoscape clips, and what we do is we position them along the length of the board, but we only fix them on the middle two battens. So these battens here are 50 mil apart, and what that does is it fixes the board in place but allows the board to expand above the screws and below the screws, but it still gives it a fixing in the middle. Now the clips along the rest of the length of the board only have to be screwed to the batten and not to the board itself. So we've got a few boards on. It's looking quite good already. Luke's fixing them. Chris said that we're working too slowly, didn't you?
I did, definitely too slow.
So what he's doing now, like, is he's trying to cut. How many you got there? 3, or is that a guide? No, so he's cutting 2 at once because we're working too slow. So Luke's fixing. Chris is cutting. I don't really know what that leaves me doing. Talking, not a lot exactly. So once you get going, you get pretty quick at it, to be fair. Now I'm really happy with that. I think that looks absolutely mega. Once we've done the whole thing, it's going to look great. Before I chose this stuff, I ordered one of Ecoscape's little sample packs. There's lots of different colours to choose from. I did consider this one actually, spiced oak. That looks really nice. So 6 different colours to choose from in the sample pack there. This one's the silver birch, and yeah, I think it was the right choice. So like I say, we were going to do this in, you know, natural timber, Western red cedar, but this stuff's UV stable, so it's not going to lose its colour, and you get a 25-year guarantee with it. So yeah, I think overall a really good choice. Look at that, starting to come along really nicely now. We're a couple of hours in, and we've got a quarter of it done. So my reveal trims are on. They're perfectly plumb. We've got some nice 45s on the corners. I'm really happy with how that looks now. And then we will clad into those. I don't know if you can hear, but I'm actually losing my voice. Hopefully the microphone can still pick me up. But I'm out here getting this done because we're, as usual, on a bit of a time limit. So the bits I need above the door are 153, so I'll cut the first one at 153, and then there's a little trick to cutting loads of boards the same length at once. And put the blade against the material which you cut, and then grab a pencil and make a little mark on the saw so that every time I can just line the material up to the pencil mark and I know I get the perfect cut. The weather's turned again, it's horrible out here now, the great British weather. So yeah, this front bit is done now. It looks really, really nice. We've just got the side to do. If you're wondering what's going to happen at the bottom there, the slabs are going to come up to where the DPM finishes, so we'll have a nice finish with a slight gap underneath the cladding. It's more of the same now. We keep putting them boards on, and then I'll show you the finished product when we get to the corner of the building and start to clad the back sides, the boundary sides, with our non-combustible metal cladding.
You're giving me wind and rain. Some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh.
And that is the composite cladding complete. And now what we're going to do is move on to the back corner, and I'm going to start to show you how we fix the metal box profile in place on our boundary edges. So this is what we're using on our boundary edges to give us that non-combustible that we need for the permitted development rules. It's metal box profile from a company called Cladding. Now there's not a lot of room to film down here, but I'm going to cut the next one and show you how we fix it in place. It's actually really, really easy, and it only takes about 5 minutes to put each sheet on, so it's a lot quicker than your cladding. We've put a few screws in for now. I'll probably come back and put a few more in once we've got them all up. If you look at the first one we've put up, we've started from the corner where our cladding is, and we've just slotted it into this corner trim here, and that actually gives us a really nice neat finish. So now what we're going to do is carry on in that direction. We've taken a measurement from the soffit down to the bottom batten, and that gives us the perfect finished height. We'll transfer that measurement onto the metal box profile,
and then I'll use a grinder to cut it to length. Once you've cut the stuff to length, it's really easy, he says as he struggles, to lift it up to the soffit, and then what we're going to do is get a couple of screws in it. Now the screws that you get are these ones from Cladding. They've got a washer already attached to them, and all you do, hold it in place, and quite simply just put these little tech screws into the profile like that. So we've got a bunch of them in. What we're going to do now is go around the rest of the sheet, screw it in place. So you get these little caps as well, colour coded caps, and we'll just pop them over the heads of the screws, and you'll never see them. And with your cladding you'll want some of these. These are stitcher screws, and where the sheets overlap you just pop one of these screws in. Again, they're tech screws, so all you do is drive them in, and that will stitch that together and make it a really tight joint, so no water can get in and the wind can't get behind it or anything like that. So we've done both of the boundary sides, and we've worked our way to the corner of the building now, and because the building has a fall on the roof, we've had to cut a slight angle on the top of the metal sheets, but that's really easy. Basically it's 20mm per metre width of box profile, or you can just take measurements and do it that way. So what I've done is cut the box section of the profile off so that our corner flashing fits flush over this flat section here. It's quite hard to film down here because there isn't a lot of room, but basically just like before, we've cut our corner flashing to length. So I'll just lift that on, hold it in place, and then I'm going to screw it to the battens just like we did with the box profile sheets, which will hold the whole thing in place. So that is all the cladding done, but we're not done with this episode yet because we need to finish the roof. So for the roof we've got 200mm black fascia boards to go around the perimeters first. That's the first step. So we're going to peel back the EDPM, the rubber roof, so that we can fix those fascia boards to the perimeter. So Chris has just taken a measurement of our perimeter, and then what we're going to do is, if you follow me over here, we've got our fascia boards. They are 200mm, and it's a tiny little sliver that we actually need to take off our 200mm width. So Chris has devised this little tool. He's been working on this for hours now, not really. How long have you been working on this? Half hour? Something like that. We're going to cut these with the circular saw. Now Chris has made this little jig, and that basically sits in the lip of the fascia board, and then the circular saw sits within the jig. You can just slide it along, and that'll allow us to cut off the exact measurement that we need. So we can just buzz that all the way along and they'll be perfect. So I've set the circular saw depth to the thickness of the board, and I've set the jig so that when I now run this down the board, I'll be able to rip off that little thin piece that we need to take off. And you can see that we just took off that little sliver so that the width of our fascia board is now perfect. Oh, and little giant ladders, the only ladders you really need because they're so versatile. Since I've had these, I haven't got any other ladders out of the back of the van. So if you're in the market for a ladder, get a little giant. So the first board we're going to bring flush with the perimeter, the timber here. It doesn't really matter because they've got corner trims that go over them anyway. But if we start flush and the bit that overshoots at the end, we can just trim that off. And to make it a little bit easier, grab a couple of clamps like this, and that'll just hold it there whilst you get some nails in. The nails we use for the fascia are these black plus top nails. We're just going to hit them in, they'll go through nice and easy. I'm going to put them a hammer width apart. It's a bit hard for Chris to film this from there. Like that, they go in nice and easy. They need to be the perfect height because you've got a trim that's going to come down over this. So we want the pins to come underneath that trim. We're having a debate here about hand saws. Chris thinks they take more skill.
They do take more skill.
Well, I don't know.
No batteries involved.
There is that. Power tools are cooler. But that's my argument anyway. So, we've got the first fascia up. Now if you look down here, the first fascia runs past the perimeter. And what we're going to do now is just buzz that off with the multi-tool, because power tools are cooler. So just like that, that's the old bit. There we go. That is nice and flush with the corner, and the corner trim will hide all that.
And now we're just going to whiz round the rest of the building and put all the fascias on.
So the fascias are all on. I'm going to go around and do the corner trims once we've got the rubber roof finished. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to glue the rubber roof down onto the roof deck. But before we do that, we need to come to the back of the building and put a batten along the fascia at the top. And that is to bring our gutter trim out a little bit so that the water falls down nicely into the gutter. If we don't do that, we're going to find that the water's going to miss the gutter because the trim is not going to sit out far enough. So we're now going to glue the rubber epdm roof down to the roof deck. If you missed the episode where we built the roof, go back to episode 4 and check that out because that's kind of where we're picking up from. Now the first stage of gluing the rubber down is to roll it back halfway along the roof. So we're going to grab the rubber and we'll roll that back halfway. Can be a bit tricky on your own. It's helpful if you've got someone to give you a hand with it really. Now we did give this a little tidy up before we put the rubber on, but I'm just going to use a blower. You can use a broom, whatever. Just get any grit off your boots or anything like that off the roof before we glue it. So this is the adhesive. It's Perma Roof for the Firestone EDPM rubber roof that we're now going to glue down. It's really easy to use. I'll show you how to use it once I get back up on the roof. But the only real thing to watch out is that you don't use it in freezing temperatures. Now it's quite thick stuff. Don't skimp on it. It goes quite far. And then we're just going to roll that onto the roof deck. But try not to get any standing kind of blobs of adhesive on there or anything like that. Now there are spray adhesives that you can use around the edges, but we don't need to do that because we're going to be fixing our rubber through the trims and into the fascias. So we don't need an extra adhesive around the edges, but I'll show you that once I've got this down. So that's the adhesive onto the deck, right up to halfway, and you'll find that that'll start to go tacky quite quickly. Once it starts to go tacky, we're going to roll the rubber back over the roof.
Now, this is the bit that's a lot easier if there's two of you. Unfortunately, I didn't have anyone around to give me a hand, so it was a little bit more of a struggle. But gradually roll the rubber out onto the glue, and then I like to use a big long brush to sweep out any air bubbles or pockets of air from underneath the rubber so that you get a nice smooth finish on the roof.
And now what we're going to do is move on to getting the EDPM trims onto the roof. So they overlap our fascias and our rubber and they pin the whole thing nice and tight around the sides. We're going to start with the side trims and then I'll show you the guttering trims along the back edge.
Before you fix the trims, just peel the protective film off.
With With the EDPM roof, you get these poly tops, just like we did with the fascias. We'll hit them in with a hammer, only this time we've got these little pre-drilled holes. Now what they do is they allow the trim to expand and contract and move a little bit around the pin. So we want to make sure we hit the pin in the middle of those little holes, and that way that trim can move. Now it's a bit tricky because you've got to hold everything and do this all at the same time. So I found my corner and I'll pull all that rubber tight. What I'm doing is just pushing that pin in, and that way it's nipping the rubber to the fascia behind so that the rubber stays taut. And then what I'm going to do is just hammer that home. And now we continue this way, keep the rubber pulled tight, tension on the top of the trim, hold it all there, poly pin in, drive the poly pin home. And then you just pop the corner trim over the corner,
and then we'll use the pins just to fix the corners in place.
Your joints, what you want to do is just leave a small gap for expansion, and then these little joint trims, they just pop over the side like that, line them up, and that just neatens the whole thing up. So now we're at the back corner here and we're going to install the gutter trim. These are a slimmer profile trim. The first piece of that gutter trim sits with the chamfered edge along the top of our batten for our guttering. So we've folded the rubber back over. Now we've got identical trims. Rather than having them this way up, we're going to have them this way up with this edge curling over the top, and that is going to nip our rubber nice and tight to the trim underneath. And the holes in the trims will line up, so you'll be able to nail the poly pins all the way through both trims and the rubber, which will pull everything nice and tight. And that is the rubber roof done. All that leaves us is the gutter at the back, which I'm going to do tomorrow because the sun is setting. But what I do just want to quickly do is trim off the rubber around the edge. What we've got now is our fascia underneath that rubber. So I'm going to get a knife and I'm going to cut along the bottom of the rubber roof trim, and I'm going to run the blade at an angle up into that rubber along the rubber roof trim, and that's going to cut that nice and tidy. If you don't run your blade at an angle, you're going to see it. So make sure you run that blade at an upwards angle and be careful not to slip. Take your time because you don't want to scratch the fascia. Now I'm just finishing up the joint trims and corner trims for the fascia boards, and they come in a 300mm length. So I've cut one down and it will trim that fascia nicely. The corners work in exactly the same way. They just cover up the joints and our corners. All you're going to need is something like this miter bond, a 2-part adhesive, and you just want to stick one side of the trim. You don't want to stick both sides because then the board can't expand and contract and it could crack the trim. So all we do with this is just stick one side of it with the glue, and I'll spray the activator onto the trim and quite simply stick the trim on. Make sure it's nice and level. Do that on all the corners and all the joints, and that is your roof complete. So this video has been a monumental effort for us to film. It's been the hardest video for me to film in the whole 3 years that I've been doing this channel, and that was because of illness. In one of the clips you heard I didn't really have a voice. I lost my voice for a few days. I couldn't film. We had material delays, we've had weather delays, we couldn't do the roof because of the frost, so we've had to jumble things around. I'd normally have done the roof before I did the cladding, so that's been a logistical nightmare. We've had other jobs on. It's taken ages to film this episode, and it's gone on over multiple filming sessions. And I hope it's been a good video and you're enjoying it so far. If you are, leave us a comment down below, let me know, and let me know what else you want to see, because that's really important for me to bring the best content that I can for you guys on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe because you don't want to miss future videos, and hit like because that helps us let the video reach more people on YouTube. So we finally got this video made, and now we've done the outside minus the guttering and the paving. I think it's the perfect time to show you guys what we created. I hope you guys like it as much as I do, and check out this video if you've missed the rest of the build, and this video if you want to see my renovation stuff on the inside of the house. And I'll see you guys in the next one.